Oxford and Imperial, two of the UK's top institutions. Here's what I wish I'd known. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Natasha. I did my Masters in Systems and Synthetic Biology at Imperial, and I just finished my first year of PhD at the University of Oxford in Engineering Biology. My first year at Oxford felt a lot like a Masters, so I thought I'd make this video to give you a bit of an insight if you're torn between the two institutions or if you're moving from one to the other. First of all, in terms of community and culture, I would say Imperial feels way more international. Oxford is, in my experience, quite British-centred. However, I think that Oxford wins when it comes to diversity of thought, only because it's not a strictly STEM university. Also, because of the college system, you're constantly meeting and having lunch and dinner and interacting with people doing completely different subjects to you. For example, in my college, I'm the only person doing a PhD in engineering biology. And it's really cool because it feels like a real break. My college is 5 minutes away from my lab, so I just go for lunch and chat to people from, for example, doing education and have like really cool insights into the world of education and policy, and then go back to the lab. At Imperial, the experience was way more like have lunch with my lab mates or my course, and conversations were way more STEM orientated. That being said, I think it's way easier to switch off in London when it comes to post-work life. You can leave Imperial and you can live a completely different life where the fact that you're at Imperial is irrelevant because London's massive and you kind of get lost within everyone else that's not from the university. That's not really an experience you're going to have at Oxford because everything is centred around the university. The whole town is filled with colleges. Most of your social activities will involve people from the university. You bump into people everywhere, which means that it's very easy to retain friendships and build friendships in a very natural and spontaneous way. But I think the negative is that you always feel a bit watched. To give you an example, I feel way more comfortable vlogging in London than in Oxford because Oxford has that kind of small town village feel to it, and I'm always like, oh, this is so embarrassing, I'm vlogging. Whereas in London, no one really cares and everyone's kind of doing their own thing. No one cares in Oxford either, but because of that small town vibe, I care more, but we're working on it. In terms of social life, I think London has the reputation of being really isolating and really overwhelming, but something that surprised me is that if you don't know anyone in London, there is so much to do and there's so many fun solo activities to try out. In Oxford, even though it has that reputation of being friendly and wholesome and close-knit community, if you're not part of that close-knit community, it sucks. You do very quickly become part of the Oxford community and it's great, but I think that was a big realization I had when I first moved to Oxford. I was like, wow, I know no one. What do I do? My advice, join Run Club and join dancing. You will very, very, very quickly make friends. Contrary to popular belief, I don't think that Oxford is cheaper than London in terms of rent. However, where Oxford is cheaper is travel. So if you have a bike, you have free travel. Everything in the city is a 20-minute cycle away, so it's really easy to get around for free and you're not spending £5 a day on the tube. However, if you don't have a bike, travel is really unreliable and really, really expensive. I think it's £2.50 for one journey on the bus, whereas in London it's like £1.75 and way more reliable. So that's just something to be aware of because I didn't expect Oxford to be as expensive as London. When it comes to green spaces and mental well-being, I think Oxford definitely wins. When I was in London, I felt very often that I had to get out and go to the countryside and escape. London's very industrial and man-made, whereas Oxford is full of untouched nature. There's this incredible place, my favourite place in Oxford, Port Meadow, where they have horses just running around. The running culture in Oxford is huge because of this nature, so you can really enjoy it while getting to know the community. I haven't really felt that need to escape Oxford in the way I did in London. But there was more to do in London. In London, you risk feeling overwhelmed. In Oxford, you risk feeling bored. Networking is quite good at both universities. At Imperial, you will network a lot more with people in your own subject. So for example, I was in the Department of Life Sciences and the networking opportunities in that department are insane. I talk about that a bit later. If you want to network more in general, Oxford is probably much easier because you are put into a college with people from different subjects. There's a lot of opportunities to attend free conferences in colleges and society organised events. The formal dinners are always very, very diverse in terms of the kind of subjects that everyone's doing. Networking is much more organic in Oxford when it comes to cross-departmental networking. So networking is basically socialising at Oxford. Whereas at Imperial, the absence of the college system means that your network is your department and your societies, which is, I think, a very common experience in all of the universities that don't have colleges. As I mentioned, I did SynBio at Imperial and EngBio at Oxford, basically the same thing. But something I really wanted to talk about in this video is how SynBio/EngBio community differs between the two institutions. So I would say Oxford is more medtech, medicine application focused, and maybe a little bit of agriculture, a little bit of industrial biotech. Imperial is way more industrial biotech focused. Imperial has a lot of let's engineer bacteria to produce industrial products. Let's build engineered living materials. Let's program algae to produce industrial products. Let's make new compounds, that sort of thing, for industrial applications. Oxford is way more, let's 3D print organs, let's make therapeutics, let's make vaccinations. Those are the sort of differences in applications. I think for me, moving from Imperial to Oxford, I had to rationalise that I was going to go to Oxford knowing that I might not do a strictly bacterial engineering SynBio project. However, being aware that doing a medicine application focused project could have applications in SynBio. For example, if you can engineer material to deliver a drug, then you can think about how to transfer those skills to engineer that material to deliver an enzyme. So I don't think it's a huge deal breaker, but I think something that Imperial has that Oxford does not is life science department cohesion. Here's what I mean by that. First of all, there's more PIs doing SynBio, but more importantly, the Department of Life Sciences is really concentrated, and there's 3 buildings on one campus. 2 of them are right next to each other. One of them is 10 minutes across campus. And what's really cool is there's one building, the Sir Alexander Fleming building, which I was in for my project. This is a building of 5 floors full of PIs and researchers doing SynBio. So if you need anything or if you need help with something, you can usually just go up the stairs across the corridor and someone will be able to help you. If not, you just go across to the other building. It's so concentrated. The benefits of that are that you are probably hot desking next to someone in another lab, so you're getting to know people from that lab, and there's a lot of like cross-pollination of ideas between researchers, which is really cool. And I think that's further supported by the fact that there's this specific designated area where everyone in SAF has lunch every day. So you get to know researchers from like the floor above, the floor below, and it's really cool. Like, SAF, the building, is a whole life sciences community. There is also Lab Social every Friday on the 7th floor of one of the life sciences buildings. Beautiful view, beautiful space with a terrace. And every Friday, one lab from the Department of Life Sciences is responsible for organising a social, bringing snacks, bringing drinks, bringing speakers. And they're so fun. They're so well attended. You get to know people naturally and build friendships organically. And you usually end up at the pub after the social on Friday and then go home at like 2, 3 a.m. sometimes. There's a lot of Imperial alumni that still attend the Friday socials. They're just the highlight. They're such a highlight of the Department of Life Sciences at Imperial, and they just don't exist at Oxford. There's a massive group chat from the whole Department of Life Sciences where I'm still on it and I still see people messaging it. Hey, can someone help me with this protocol I've never done? Does someone have this reagent, etc, etc. Bottom line, I think the SynBio scene at Imperial is way more centralised than it is at Oxford. I would say location also makes a difference in the sense that SynBio in London more generally is massive. You have Imperial, you have UCL, you have Queen Mary, you have the Francis Crick Institute, you have all of the startups that are London based, and it's quite fun because you might be attending an incubator event or a startup event or a seminar series that is hosted in a random venue in Chinatown or in a hotel lobby in Canary Wharf. Like, you wouldn't really have that at Oxford. Usually the SynBio events are probably organised by the SynBio Society, which is fantastic and organises great events. But SynBio across Oxford as a city is not as big as SynBio across London. Teaching wise, my experience at Oxford was so much better than my experience at Imperial. I felt way more supported. Our cohort was much smaller, which meant that when we were in class doing talk module, we were between 7 and 13 people. We were 7 when we were split into 2 streams. So those who hadn't done engineering before were in an engineering classroom doing maths and MATLAB, while those who hadn't done biology before were in labs. And then when we came together, we were 13. So I felt like the learning experience was way more tailored to the cohort and way more focused, I would say. On the other hand, Imperial consisted of a series of lectures, a couple of workshops, which were for the whole cohort of 34 people, which is not a big cohort, but there's definitely a big difference between 7 and 34. When it came to the assignments, we were so lost. We had 5 assignments for Imperial before Christmas. At Oxford, we had 3, and they were so much more chill. Oxford was way more interest driven. If you were interested in something, you were able to take it further. If you weren't, then you were welcome to move on. Imperial felt very sink or swim. So when it came to the assignments, there was a lot of late night library sessions as a whole cohort, trying to put our brains together to figure out what the hell we were supposed to do, because we were so lost. Like, we just didn't get what we were meant to be doing. That being said, I do think there's benefits to being thrown into the deep end and left to just figure it out. For example, I think that's what got me really close with my cohort and really, bond with the people around me. Common trauma over the really difficult assignments. That was something I didn't have at Oxford. Something else that surprised me, and I need to give Oxford credit for, is that during our welcome week of the engineering biology PhD course, we went into a seminar room for 2 days, and we had PIs that came in and pitched their research to us over the course of 2 days. And there were networking breaks where we could talk to the PIs, and it was amazing because, first of all, there was no list when it came to choosing our projects at Oxford. You designed your project with the PI in such a way that it aligned with both of your interests. That meant that when the PIs were pitching, they didn't pitch specific projects, they pitched their research more generally, but also their lab culture, which is something really important to see. It just made everything so much easier because we didn't have to schedule meetings with the PIs to meet them and have informal chats, because we could just have them in that room and then schedule follow-up meetings later. It made project selection so much better and just so much more student-centered. At Imperial, the process was very much like, here's a list of 50 projects where 10 of them were of any real interest to the 34 of us, which meant that a lot of people didn't get their first choice. Project descriptions were about 4 lines, a paragraph maximum, and we were able to schedule meetings with PIs, but it definitely wasn't on the PI's priority list, and it didn't feel like they had as much time for us. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to design your own project. I managed to design it and I feel very lucky about it, but I was definitely the exception in the cohort, and I think that was one of the reasons I got away with it. In terms of startups and spin-outs, I think Oxford has a really loud spin-out startup culture. Everyone wants to start their own company at Oxford. That's kind of how it feels, whereas at Imperial it's a little bit more quiet. If someone sells their company for £1 billion who's Oxford based, you're going to hear about it. I think the good thing about that is that there's so many opportunities in your face to find out about starting a company. Oxford enterprises do events, the business school do events, there's workshops on how to deliver pitches, there's term-long leadership courses, there's all this stuff. It's very concentrated and very in your face. So it's very easy to get swept up in that kind of peer pressure of starting a company. Imperial does have an enterprise hub, but you need to put more effort into seeking it out and putting yourself out there. I think at Imperial, things are a bit more discreet in my experience. Overall, I think they're both really good universities. I think that if I were to have my time again for 1 year and 1 year only, I would have to choose Imperial. Imperial was a very work hard, play hard year. That is not something I could have sustained in a PhD. Based on that, I think I would really burn out quite quickly if I were doing my PhD at Imperial, and I'm really excited to be at Oxford. Definitely had to change my lifestyle a lot, but I think that's a good thing. I feel way more balanced at Oxford. I think there definitely have been times where I felt a bit bored in comparison to when I was at Imperial, I think you need to let the city change you a little bit, and you can't go to Oxford with London expectations. Realistically, London is probably one of the most alive and vibrant cities in the UK. So if you move to a small town from London, it is going to feel quite underwhelming. But I think if you kind of lean into it, you do end up really enjoying it. The university experience at Oxford is pretty mega. And yeah, I think it definitely differs from living in Oxford as a non-university student, because the university just has so many opportunities to do stuff and learn new skills. You can pick up rowing if you're a fan of 6 a.m. wake-ups. The nature's amazing. I think Imperial is a bit more intense and probably less friendly than Oxford / wholesome, but it's definitely a place where you can achieve goals that you set your mind to, because you can just get swept up and dragged by the work ethic that exists at Imperial, that also exists at Oxford, but it's a bit more low-key, apart from startups. That's what I would say. That's how I would summarize it. I hope this video is helpful. If you want an insight into my experience at both universities, feel free to check out my vlogs on my YouTube channel. I have 3 parts to my Imperial life, and I have about 12 vlogs right now on my PhD life at Oxford. You can really see the behind the scenes of everything I've gotten up to over the past 2 years. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!